we'd start speaking about the Crucifixion book. And I have to ask you how you got interested in this topic. Like, right? It's not like a very rosy topic to deal with. So how did you get interested in writing a book on crucifixion?
So first off, it started off as an article that became too long. So that's why it's in the shape that it is. But it began, so I was taking a class with my dear advisor, Professor Wadad Al-Qadi, and she has this great class that she used to teach, where we go
University of Chicago.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's called the biographical dictionaries, which there's this great historiographical tradition in the Arabic literary tradition where you write history of the community, world, etc., locations, but you organize it not chronologically, but according to biography. And so the way that she would organize the class is we do like the major central works, and then when we're done with the major central works, we go into more minor works. And I got randomly assigned this book called Kitab al-Mahan by Abdul Arab al-Tamimi. And basically the title of the book means the Book of Trials. And it was a collection of the biographies of prominent scholars and holy persons from the early history of Islam up to the day of Abu Arab al-Tamimi, this North African scholar. And he mentions all the horrible things that happened, to these people. And so like when so-and-so was flogged, when so-and-so was imprisoned, when so-and-so was exiled. And he has one section that was when so-and-so was crucified. And I was like, wow, that's crucified, dang. And it made me wonder, like, well, was crucifixion still a thing? And what was crucifixion like? And I was under the general impression that crucifixion after the Christianization of the Roman Empire, which is like totally gone. I knew some examples of like the Jesuits when they're proselytizing in Japan, stuff like this. But for the most part, crucifixion was like dead door now, right? And so was this actually crucifixion's improper way of reading the Arabic word? And so I got interested in all these kind of questions.
And that's the only one, it's just salaba is the word.
Yeah, it's salaba. Yeah, I mean, there's other ways of saying it, but okay. Just salaba is the word, or salb. And once I started looking more into it, I realized that one of the problems was I was bringing to the word a certain assumption that I inherited from the iconography of Jesus of Nazareth on the cross. And that's exactly what crucifixion looked like. And that was exactly what crucifixion was at all times and places and blah, blah, blah. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that crucifixion is really just a word for taking someone's body and attaching it to a piece of wood. It doesn't matter what shape it is, either as a sort of punishment, whether while alive or post-mortem. It can be what I call like an instrument or a machine of death in a way, or it could just be a way of displaying a dead body.
Right.
And so I started exploring that broader understanding of crucifixion in kind of late antique context. And the first question that I had in my mind was, when the Qur'an says that, you should crucify highway robbers and people that spread corruption in the earth and things like this, the question is, or is it reviving a practice that was abolished or something like that? And what I found out is that crucifixion actually survived past the Christianization of the Roman Empire, but also it was not just a Roman phenomenon. You also find it under the Sassanids in Persia and things like that. And that even what crucifixion entailed, and it could be as a type of punishment, evolved under early Islamic period. So I tried to kind of trace that and say, like, well, what was crucifixion in Roman late antiquity? What was crucifixion in Persian Sassanid late antiquity? And what was crucifixion like under the Umayyads as well? Right. So I could have kept on going, but that's all kind of
yeah, I don't know how interesting it would be or how easy it is to communicate through a conversation, but so the Arabic word salb or salaba and the verb is related, I guess, to the Aramaic, the Jewish Aramaic word, but not to the Christian Syriac term, which is something like zakaf.
Yeah, zakaf, yeah.
So, but it does appear in the Quran as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, one thought I had is you mentioned that crucifixion is not only an instrument of death, but can also be refer simply to the showing of a dead body as a type of humiliation or scandal. I mean, could you speak to that a bit more? I mean, what would be the
Yeah.
point of not just killing someone, but then, hanging their body up for all to see?
Yeah. So oftentimes, and this became standard, is crucifixion was used as a mean, as like a, I never know how to say with which G to use, a gibbet or gibbet, one of them, but it's used as like a sort of way to display someone's executed body.
Mhm.
And so say you have a rebel, and that rebel is executed or dies in battle. Instead of giving that body kind of a proper burial, you expose it to ignominy and shame, right? And it has a number of functions. So one of the functions is seeing that horrible fate of the shamed, usually denuded body rotting for an indeterminate time. It's supposed to serve as a deterrent for anybody that would do such a thing.
Right.
It's sort of like what they used to say, like we used to take like pirates and they would put them in a gibbet, like when the tide was out, and then when it would come in, they would drown and then just leave the bodies out on the shore to deter pirates and things like that.
Okay.
This I have deterrence. One of the things that I kind of felt was happening in the early Islamic period as well is crucifixion is pretty much in stark contrast, especially of dead bodies, is pretty much in stark contrast to the sort of reverence and the sort of pious interring of the body in the ground that is normative in Islamic law. You basically give the body its final washing, you do the prayers over, and then you turn the ground. It's kind of a final farewell to the deceased person, and the janazah and the prayer and the washing of the body is a way of kind of sealing their kind of membership, their earthly membership in the body of the Muslim community.
Believers, right?
Yeah. And so by denying their crucifixion basically inverts that. So instead of affirming their inclusion in the community, you basically crucify them and display their body as an example from their exclusion, not just from society, and as proof of their of like the fact that they did something wrong, but also it's a mark of their kind of exclusion. And there's a lot of really interesting examples of crucifixion that happened to descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. Probably one of the most famous examples that is described in the most detail is the crucifixion of Zayd ibn Ali, who is the great grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, I believe. He's Zayd ibn Ali ibn al-Hussein ibn Ali. So anyway, so one of the things really fascinating about it, we actually have a letter of the Caliph Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik that kind of gives a little bit of ideological rationale behind his crucifixion. And Hisham calls it his crucifixion, he's characterized as al-hujja fil uquba. That is, the fact that God had given Hisham the caliphate and empowered him to impose such punishments was kind of this definitive proof of the falsity of Zayd's claim to be a legitimate claimant to the caliphate that Hisham occupied. And his ability to punish and to display his punished body was proof of God's kind of favoring him. Otherwise, Zayd would have been successful, in other words.
Okay, I want to speak specifically about Zayd, and then you give another example of Abdullah ibn Zubair, and speak about both of those. I wanted to turn to the Quran first, so if that's okay.
That's right.
Yeah, because just to sort out a little bit, because the verb does appear in the Quran. I want to ask first about the verse which refers to the crucifixion or non-crucifixion of Jesus. So in Surah An-Nisa, Quran 4:157, in there, the order is interesting because you mentioned that sometimes crucifixion could follow death, because it does say وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ. So they did not kill him and they did not crucify him. I don't know, is that connected to what you're saying about crucifixion sometimes following death and not as the instrument of death?
Yeah, it's just, I never thought about that as the post-mortem order. I have a lot of thoughts on that verse that I haven't given yet.
Okay, but don't
But
hesitate to give
no,
those
no,
thoughts
it's okay.
too.
So
Give us
that verse in
all.
particular, no, I don't like. I don't think it's talking about a post-mortem crucifixion of Jesus. My own kind of theory is that it's referring to the episode of Jesus's crucifixion as found in the life of Jesus, the Jewish life of Jesus,
Okay.
in which there's a dispute between the followers of Jesus and the faithful Jews about what happens to Jesus's body. So in the Torah that Yeshua is what it's called, this Jewish life of Jesus, they crucify Jesus, but then his body disappears.
Okay.
And the explanation is that it's taken by a river or something like that.
Okay.
A stream. And the Christians or the followers of Jesus, they say, oh no, God raised him to heaven. You didn't actually successfully crucify him.
Oh, that's
That
very
is so similar to what's going on there.
following verse.
Yeah. And I think, and one thing like I think that you've shown too in particular is that verse follows this kind of litany of kind of bad things that the Israelites did. And so because it's like a historical list of bad things. And then the Quran kind of basically takes the side of Jesus in this dispute. So I think there might be something like that going on there more than the
Okay.
crucifixion.
Yep,
thing.
that would might not be a big deal. Okay,
Yeah.
and then the other verse I wanted to speak about is Quran chapter 5 or Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 33, which you address in the book. But yeah, I mean, here it speaks about the punishment of those who literally conduct war against God and the messenger, which is interesting that they're sort of brought together there, both God and the messenger, in that the punishment is, among other things, that they be killed or crucified. So again, maybe once again, I'm reading too much into it, but you know, it says that yuqattalu aw yusallabu. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that verse generally, or about why is it or being killed or crucified?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole litany of things. It's not being killed or crucified, or having your arms and leg, your hands and legs cut from opposite sides.
Yep.
Or being exiled. And I think that or connection is really interesting. And the reception of that verse in the early legal literature, the way that this is dealt with is often it's advised to a lot of the kind of early legal claims that basically it says that the imam is sort of is given a kind of host of options that he can choose from. Okay. So he could combine them or not apply them at will, right? However, other scholars actually say that it depends upon the crime. So if you are just merely guilty of brigandage in thieving, then you get only one of the series of the punishments. But if you combine thievage and brigandage with murdering people, then you get compounding punishments. Okay. And so they have different ways of deciding how these things all apply. But one of the things that I do think is really quite interesting is how, by the way, I am saying brigandage for this Yaharbun. It's ala wa rasulihi. I think that's what the phrase.
Yep.
And you know, usually in brigandage is my translation of what is known in the legal literature as hiraba, or this sort of spreading corruption on the earth and defying God and his prophet. I see that as more like God and his prophet kind of represent the authority. Right?
Okay.
So they're spreading corruption and they're warring or defying his authority. Right. So, and it's like the same way, like when you commit a crime, you don't just commit a crime against the individual, but you also commit a crime against the state or against the king, or in this case, against God and his prophet. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So very, very strong language. To me, that verse represents the way in which the status of the messenger is elevated in, material usually attributed to the Medinan period.
Yeah.
Where, an offense against God or an offense against the messenger, where there are references to obedience of the messenger, yeah, so I mean, that's a question that's been studied by a number of people, including Andrew O'Connor, who's at St. Norbert's University, wrote a dissertation on this point. I forget if he uses the term Rasulology, just to indicate like the higher status that the messenger seems to get in some ways. Yeah, but maybe that's another question. So yeah, back to last point before we get to the other book, but just these two case studies. Now, Abdullah ibn Zubair, son of one of the Prophet's companions, leads this big revolt in Mecca, principally. You can correct me if I get any of the history wrong. Interestingly, because I think it's his brother Urwa who comes up in the other book, right? As a source for the for certain accounts or reports about Muhammad. But that was a serious revolt, right? Like Abdullah ibn Zubair wasn't a small thing. He minted coins, establishing his own claims to the imamate, or to leadership within the community, not the Shiite imamate. And so maybe the drama of his crucifixion matches the level of threat that he actually posed. Not sure. Yeah, maybe I'll start with that. Like, what does that proposition sound like to you?
Yeah, so it does. Ibn Zubayr's death is a big can of worms. So let's see where. So I guess the basic story is pretty scandalous in and of itself. I mean, I wouldn't say he was a rebel. I would say that he is one of many rival emirs at the time, as an Amir al-Mu'minin or candidates for the commandership of the faithful or whatever. I don't think he ever used caliph. Whether or not we can use caliph for these early guys, I think the verdict is maybe a little bit still out. But they are anachronistically called caliphs by the tradition. But so the interesting thing about Ibn Zubayr, and we have this written by contemporaries as well, is that the seat of his rebellion was essentially Mecca, and he chose Mecca for an interesting reason. He chose Mecca because you're ostensibly not allowed to conduct any violence within its sacred precincts, within its haram. And in order for Abd al-Malik and his general al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf, is the guy that comes down and actually kills him, to really put it into his movement, they have to besiege Mecca itself. Or the first time, well, second time it really ever happened. And they burned down the Kaaba. I mean, it's a mess. And Ibn Zubayr is killed on the battlefield. And I mean, this gets a bit grisly, so I'll apologize. But he is cut up into pieces and he is kind of crucified alongside a dog, even. And there's all sorts of really interesting anecdotes about this crucifixion and what it meant and things like that. One of the key ideas is, well, who is ultimately responsible for it? Later historiography blamed al-Hajjaj, who has a very notorious reputation as absolutely kind of merciless governor, and not well known for his piety by any means. And he's, once word reaches Abd al-Malik about how Ibn Zubayr's body has been desecrated, he tells al-Hajjaj to give him a proper burial, right? Is that true?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other things that are really interesting about it is some anecdotes suggest that Ibn Zubayr himself was expecting to be crucified. And this is the anecdotes surrounding what he did in preparation for it, I thought was very interesting. And it helped me kind of understand a little bit what the meaning of crucifixion was, and some of its more visceral forms and as a spectacle. So what he begins to do is he takes musk and he begins to consume massive amounts of musk, this Ibn Zubayr, in anticipation of being killed. And the idea is that he was basically consuming this musk in order to not stink when his body was crucified. Wow. And musk is a very important aromatic as well, because it's in a lot of the traditions, the kind of the soil of paradise is said to smell of musk or to be made out of musk and things like this. So by consuming this musk, he wanted to have like the smells of paradise associated with body, rather than the putrescence of the rotting of his flesh. And it's interesting, and he's not the only person who this happened to, that when Hajjaj kind of crucifies what's left of his body, he puts a rotting dead animal next to him. And we have this, not just dogs, but fish and other things too. And the reason why it seems, as far as I can tell, is he wants to kind of increase the putrescence of the smell from crucifixion, right? It's in the message. And there's also really interesting things too that are kind of counter narratives against what his crucifixion is supposed to say. So you have this very touching scene where his mother, a daughter of Abu Bakr, the first caliph, her name's Asma, is at the foot of his cross or whatever contraption he's crucified on. And she's like, of course, sad and really beyond consolation. But one of the prominent scholars, it's been a while since I wrote this, so hopefully I'm remembering this correctly. I think it's Ibn Omar. So this would be the son of Omar, the second caliph, comes up to her and says, don't worry. This does not represent the fate of Ibn Zubayr. He says, he says the spirits are with God, like the spirits of human beings are with God. So in many ways, the idea is, can you read if you—
That's exactly right. Page 45, everyone.
Oh yeah.
Got it.
Can you really hurt a person by doing something to their corpse? And the message seems to be like, no, a righteous person, their ruh, like their life force or their spirit is kind of beyond being injured.
Yeah, it's a beautiful passage. And then you write, if I just quote you here, just to finish the anecdote, to which Asma replied, nothing hinders me from bearing this, that is, bearing the sadness and the grief. For even the head of John the Baptist was made into a gift for one of the Israelite harlots.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
Serious stuff.
I forgot about that. That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a great read. Really, really fascinating. It's gory. So like,
yeah.
I
mean, unfortunately, the nature, it has to be gory in order to do the kind of analysis, to understand like really its cultural importance. You have to get into some of that, that nitty-gritty.